Closing arguments are in, and voters heading to the polls. Polls are open here in Illinois, and they are closing at 7 p.m. Of course, if you're still in line, you should be able to cast a ballot. But top of the ticket is who's going to be the next president of the United States. And to talk more about this, somebody who's been watching it closely over in Washington, D.C., is the Center Square's Casey Harper, joining us here with Illinois in Focus Daily. Casey, thanks for taking time with us this morning. First time on the show. Looking forward to touching base with you more throughout, as, of course, it's expected to be pretty tumultuous heading into a new Congress. But before we get there, we've got this election today. So tell us what the matchup is between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump.
Well, the matchup in a word, Greg, is close. In a second word, it's closer. I mean, this is one of the closest elections that we've seen. There's no denying that both campaigns are anxiously awaiting the results tonight. Of course, Americans across the country are heading to the ballot box. But interestingly, Greg, unlike past elections, over 75 million Americans have already voted. Now, this is reminiscent of COVID level numbers, but it wasn't surprising that so many people voted early, mail-in ballot, etc. during COVID for obvious reasons, a fear of infection, masking. There was a lot going on. This seems like a long ago, but it was only 4 years ago. So what we've seen, though, Greg, so that's so interesting, is 75 million votes. To put that in context, in 2020, former President Donald Trump, who of course is back on the ballot today, he received about 75 million votes in total. And, current President Joe Biden at the time received about 81 million votes. So today is historic, but unlike 2016 or 2012 before it, or 2008, we already have 75 million votes cast before today. So that's coming into this election. Of course, election day is important, but so much has already happened. It's just a new era of voting. With that being said, also speaking of the new era of voting, we've seen some demographic shifts, which we can talk more about. Trump is doing better with black voters than Republicans ever do. And Harris is doing worse with black voters than even someone like Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State, who ran, of course, in 2016, a white woman, doing better with black voters than Harris is, who, of course, would be the first black female president. So that's an interesting thing. Also, Trump is doing better with Hispanic voters. He's, the latest polling, it changes, of course, as polls do, and they have to be taken with a grain of salt. But he's doing about 45% with Hispanic voters, which is much better than, say, Mitt Romney did just a few years ago. So we've got these early voting has become such a huge part of these presidential campaigns, a confounding variable. We have demographic shifts. But then, all that being said, Greg, when you look at the swing states, the 7 closest swing states, they're all within the margin of error. And it's really a toss-up heading into election night.
And obviously, all eyes are going to be on those swing states. Last night, you had Kamala Harris hit up, 5 different spots in Pennsylvania. Trump kind of bounced around from some of the Carolinas to Pennsylvania, and I believe in Michigan as well. What are we seeing out of those swing states? Is it going to be a shift, or are things just so close that it's going to be a nail-biter and watching those poll numbers come after all the polls close?
Yeah, but it's the question, right? And if I had the perfect answer, I could be making a lot of money as a consultant right now. But I do think I have some insight, and it varies by state. Now, you might think, well, if people like Harris better, then she'll win all the states. Or if people like Trump better, then he'll win all the states. But the thing is, the demographics within those states vary widely. And so, for instance, Trump is doing well in Arizona. It's one of the 7 closest swing states. He's up by about 2 points. Still pretty close, could go either way for sure. But that's one that a lot of people expect him to win. I think that's been really influenced by the border issue, for instance, where people are very frustrated by the handling of the southern border. Some people blame Kamala Harris for that, for her role in the administration. And so she's taken flack for that. And then it goes back, Greg, to what we were discussing earlier with the Hispanic voters. Trump is doing unusually well with Hispanic voters. And so there's about a third of Arizona is Hispanic, I believe. So that's a huge win for him. And just keep in mind, the Republicans don't have to win these other demographics like black voters. They won't win black voters. They don't have to win Hispanic voters. They just have to make enough inroads to take away the huge margins that Democrats need to win. So if you turn to swing states with that in mind, like Philadelphia or Pennsylvania, rather, where Philadelphia is and has a large urban black population, I mean, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Joe Biden all received, about 90 to 95% of the black vote. And that is huge in swing states like Pennsylvania with these large cities like, Pittsburgh and especially Philadelphia. If you look at Detroit, could swing the difference for the whole swing state of Michigan. And so, of course, in past elections, we talked a lot about suburban women, and those are really important. Harris is doing well with them. But I don't want to say the Trump card, but Trump's maybe ace in the hole could be if he pulls away these black voters in places like Philadelphia, like Detroit, although Michigan doesn't look too good for him right now. But, I think we've all learned to be humble about these polls in modern politics, Greg.
Well, there's no question, especially after 2016 and even all throughout 2020 and so on. But obviously, a lot of different topics may be pushing certain segments of voters one way or the other. But, this has been pretty historic, Casey, about as far as, the past 3 months, let alone the past 8 years with a former president assassination attempt, not one but two. You had the large Republican National Convention that was all about trying to counter Biden as the candidate, and then that Sunday afterwards, Biden drops out, Harris is selected, and it's just been really fascinating to see all this. But also on top of that, the persecution of the former president. Do you think that has added to this at all? And as far as what could be a possible poll shift amongst all demographics is just how Trump has been characterized by the other side, by some in the corporate media. Will that play a role, you think?
It definitely will. It's a great point. I mean, we're really in a historic year. I would say since 2015, since Trump entered politics, every year has felt like an incredible news year with historic implications. The news cycle is moving 120 miles an hour. But this year, I mean, just to reiterate, 2 assassination attempts. We have indictments and court proceedings for the leading Republican candidate. We have, when you have a leading Republican candidate getting shot at and taken to court, and it's not even maybe the biggest news. The news stories only last, for 24 hours. I mean, that shows you where we are. We also have 2 overseas wars. We have the ongoing war in Ukraine. We also have what's going on with Israel and Gaza, which is really an Israeli-Iran war with nuclear implications. And these kind of huge stories, there's so much crowding for attention that we can't even talk about them that long. But I think in many ways, the prosecution of Trump has helped him. I mean, if you remember back to the Republican primary, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was performing well against Trump and really had a chance of beating him. And then the FBI raided his home. And that, if you look at the polls and you look at the dates, that was the inflection point for the Trump campaign in the primary. That FBI raid was the end of DeSantis's Republican primary hopes. So in that sense, the FBI really gave Trump the Republican nomination, and that just continued every time he gets indicted. I mean, if you look, for instance, at Trump's fundraising numbers, every time the mugshot comes out or he gets indicted again, those are his biggest fundraising days. And so these legal proceedings have been huge for Trump in fundraising and painting himself as the martyr, because of course Trump's message is the system is rigged. They're coming for you, but they have to go through me first. And so every time they go for him, whether it's shooting at him and who's they, right? I mean, I understand that's a pretty big question, but every time he gets shot at or he gets indicted, he says, this is proof positive of what I've been telling you all along. The system's rigged and coming for me. And I'm the only thing standing in your way. So a lot of ways it reinforces his message. It's created a lot of problems for him, but big picture, I think it has helped him in a lot of ways.
Talking with Casey Harper with the Center Square, watching what's going on over in Washington, D.C. So while you go to thecentersquare.com and you check out the Illinois page, also click the home link there because you'll be able to see the national stories as well. Casey, obviously, the issues here, Trump and Harris trying to differentiate themselves on economic issues, on foreign policy issues, on domestic issues. But ultimately, they're just going to be somebody in the executive branch who has to execute the laws that Congress makes. Let's just focus here and wrap things up. Congress, what's going to happen there? Obviously, you've got a House that's narrowly controlled by Republicans and a Senate that's narrowly controlled by Democrats. Is it going to be the same when we get out of the wash here, or is one side gonna get on top of the other?
I think what's most likely, and again, big grain of salt, I think what's most likely is a flip. Democrats have a very tough battle in the Senate right now. They're defending a lot of seats. They're defending basically twice as many seats as Republicans are defending. I think we have about 10 Republican senator seats that are up for election. And then I think there's 19 Democratic seats that are up. But then there's another 4 seats that are independents that lean Democratic. So people like Kirsten Sinema or Bernie Sanders, not technically Democrats, but everyone knows they vote to the left and they're valuable to the Democratic Party. So that puts it at about 23 Democrats who are, fighting for their lives versus 9 Republicans. And then within those, there are 7 toss-up races, and only one of them is a Republican. And then John Tester in Montana is losing his race. Anything can happen, but it's not a pretty picture for Democrats in the Senate. And the House, they're doing much better. They have a good chance. I'd say a slightly better chance than Republicans to hold the House. Those races are really influenced by turnout, though, in the presidential election. So it could really be, and probably will be, decided by how many people turn out to vote for Harris and decide, click all Democrat or go down to their House member, or the same for Trump.
Casey Harper with the Center Square. We'll be watching your reports all throughout the day today and into the evening. It's going to be a long night for all of us at the Center Square. So I greatly appreciate you taking the time with us this morning.
Thanks, Greg.
All right, it is Illinois in Focus Daily. I want to again thank Casey Harper for joining me. We will be talking with him again in the near future. And be sure to get all of the newsletters from thecentersquare.com. All right, and like, subscribe, hit that notification bell here for Illinois in Focus Daily, and get the podcast anywhere you get podcasts with America's Talking Network. I'm Greg Bishop, and appreciate you guys being here on Election Day.